Well, that was really something, and that was wonderful, Tom and Joe. Thank you so much. And it's a real honor for me, to say the least, to be here and to receive the Digitalis Award. Or is that correct? No, Dignitas, right. I think I need the Digitalis right now to carry on. Also, Plato, really my favorite philosopher. That was a stroke of imagination for you guys. It's been said that all philosophy has been a commentary on Plato. He's a controversial figure, which I also rather like. And there was a governor of California who decided that Plato's works had to be stricken from the California libraries, public libraries, because Plato was not only a communist, but he was a homosexual. Thank you, Plato, for doing those things. And the governor of California at that point really didn't know very much about what life is like. Unfortunately, he came to be president of the United States as well. But there we go. I want to thank Tom personally for this honor, as well as Erie Insurance. And aren't we lucky to have both in this city? They've added so much to this community, perhaps more than any other person or corporation in our history. Tom is reclaiming Erie to its past glory, and the work he's doing on 6th Street, let alone all the other projects that he's done, the Hagen History Center, the CORE Center for Organizational Research at Penn State Behrend, which Susie and Tom founded together. Tom has picked up the tab on that, and countless other things that he's done. With an eye on East Erie, both the company and Tom has taken a great interest in the east side of Erie as well. And Tim DeCastro, who's now the CEO of Erie Insurance, has always said, you know, I got two bosses in town here. One is Tom Hagen, and the other is his good friend from my classmate, Ron DeVecchio, or Bugsy as we call him. And I kept saying to Tim every time he says this, I say, Tim, you're just lucky. I'm the same age as both Tom and Bugsy. I could have been your priest. So, you're lucky to escape me. But it's so important that we have communities like this and people who are willing to sacrifice, and industries and corporations that are willing to sacrifice. Erie Insurance is keeping Erie employed. They are our largest firm. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Do you have bad dreams? One of mine is based on Thomas Aquinas, the Catholic Church's most celebrated systematic theologian. On the feast of St. Nicholas, 1273 in Italy, while celebrating Mass, St. Thomas received a revelation from God that caused him to stop writing, leaving his brilliant lifelong work, the Summa Theologica, unfinished. He told his secretary, "The end of my labors has come. All I have written appears to me to be so much straw after the things that have been revealed to me." As an academic and a preacher, I have dreams about giving lectures and sermons with no clothes on. I am a neurotic adult that sometimes I fear I have not much to say, or what I'm saying is a lot of straw. The second dream I have on occasion is what happened to the former Prime Minister of Britain, Liz Truss, when she met King Charles again, who said, "Back again? Dear, oh dear." That went viral on the internet. As kids, Tom Hagen Alan Dobbs, Bill Harris, and my cousin Dave Zern used to roam around 6th Street and South Shore chasing Nazis. Doubtless a worthy pursuit, but I spent a lot of time making things up about the invasion of Erie. I was a paranoid kid with a vivid imagination. Dear, oh dear. This lecture is about the possibility of tyranny in the United States, along with the use of a shared history between Britain and America. I also examine the role of education, which can play so much for the better for the future. I hope I'm not making it up, and I hope you won't say after the lecture, "Back again, dear, oh dear, what straw." So here is the lecture. I want to talk about the relationship between education and tyranny. 71% of all United States voters said democracy is at risk. But in the last election, just 7% identified that it's the most important problem facing the country. The president said Medicare, Social Security, and other issues are important, but there's something else at stake: democracy itself. We can't pretend it's going to solve itself. So, can we look to history for guidance? What is the relationship between education and tyranny? Let's give it a try. Three of the brightest stars in the English and American revolutions were John Milton, Abigail Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. Milton dealt with the persecution of the English nonconformists under Charles I. Abigail Adams dealt with women under persecution by men. And Thomas Jefferson dealt with the American oppression under George III. Milton was the crucial intellectual guide to the English Revolution, and he was hired by Cromwell to explain England to Europe, and that is not an easy job. Adams supported women's right to education and mentioned the tyranny of men. In 1778, she wrote her husband, John Adams, "You need not be told how much female education is neglected, nor how fashionable it's been to ridicule female learning." She got after him. The Adams family and Jefferson were crucial for the American Revolution, along with many others. Abigail held John on track and provided many ideas for him. Jefferson founded a college in order to compete with the Ivy League, which he believed offered a terrible education. The purpose of this lecture is to illustrate 2 points. The first is that all three believed education should be for learning, not for getting a job. They wanted an inclusive education to include most of the major subjects of their time. They did not want specialization. The second point is this: they wanted the major purpose of education to educate leaders who were sympathetic to democracy, who would work hard to save the nation from tyranny with good religion, law, and science. In the 17th century to the 19th century, most education tried to be about knowledge and to help young people take charge or at least be aware of the nation. It's the opposite today. We now have a very different philosophy of education. Job training and individual fulfillment are the flavors of the day. But with some in the United States veering toward a white supremacist government, and Russian leaders invading Ukraine and cutting off the gas to Europe, threatening nukes, the rise of authoritarian China, and many other countries moving toward tyranny, we just may need to rethink our educational content. Let me flesh that out. Milton, as I said, claimed that the true aim of all education was to train the man and the citizen. It must prepare him in the arts and sciences useful to private and public life. It should awaken the sense of religion and the love of the country with an analysis of its virtues and vices. It must, and I quote, inflame him with the high hopes of living to be a brave man and a worthy patriot, scientific knowledge, practical skill, moral elevation. Such is the threefold end that the true teacher will always keep before him. He also sought a good awareness of the manual arts. In other words, he wanted a complete education, nothing specialized. Above all, he wanted republicanism and equality for nonconformists and a free press for England. Here's his big point in his pamphlet of education. I will point ye on the right path for a virtuous and noble education, laborious indeed at the first ascent, but else so smooth, so green, so full of goodly prospect, and melodious sounds on every side, that the harp of Orpheus was not more charming. I call therefore a complete and generous education that which fits a man to perform justly, skillfully, and magnanimously all the offices in private and public life of peace and war. He soars when he talks about education. That's why he's been called the greatest prose writer in the English language. He also places philosophy, especially the Greeks, like Plato, religion, especially the Hebrews, like Moses, natural science, economics, poetry, music, languages, and the practical sides as well. Farmers, carpenters, laborers, hunters, these people were not looked down upon and should not be looked down upon, but held up for all to admire. He attacks students that are just there for the money, but not for knowledge. Listen to what he says about lawyers, and I hope there aren't too many here tonight. Quote, some allured to the trade of law, but on the promising and pleasing thoughts of litigious terms, fat contentions, and flowing fees, others betake themselves to state affairs with souls so unprincipled in virtue and true generous breeding that flattery and tyrannous aphorisms appear to them the highest points of wisdom. Echoes of this were found in the American Revolution from the lawyer James Madison, the generator of the Constitution, who said, is there no virtue among us? If there be not, we are in a wretched situation. In 1660, part of a campaign to expunge the recent Republican past, Milton's books were sent to the flames by the order of the king. Again, in 1663, in the climate of fear of a supposed plot against Charles II, the convocation at my beloved Oxford voted to burn Milton's books. What did Jefferson want for education? In Thomas Jefferson's literary diary-like commonplace book, Milton appears more than any other poet. They were close on education. It helped bring equality by raising up an educated and talented aristocracy to run the country, not based on birth and wealth. Jefferson said, the advantages of a well-directed education, moral, political, economical, are truly above all estimates. Education generates habits of application, of order, of the love of virtue. It was a means of promoting social happiness, moving society beyond barbarism, training able counselors to administer the affairs of our country in all departments, and advancing the prosperity and power and happiness of a nation, unquote. Jefferson had much educational content in common with Milton: languages, math, politics, history, literature, religion, poetry, music, art, and gardening. Unlike Milton, Jefferson liked the law, and his schedule, this is some pictures of Monticello, and his schedule for lawyers is just amazing to read. From dawn to 8 a.m., you study science, religion, and ethics. From 8 a.m. until noon, you study the law. From 1 o'clock to dinner, politics and history. After dinner, literature and music when you can. On his own, he added gardening and architecture, like Monticello, which he designed. Like Milton, these things were to be used for the common good. It was also make the individual into somebody interesting, not a boring specialist. The state should educate all young children equally, teaching them to be conscious of their equal rights as individuals and of their collective rights as a generation that will someday govern itself. Joe Monchenka, a Milton scholar at Oxford, points out that Jefferson may well have used Milton for the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson's first draft said, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal and independent." Milton's words are spikier. No man can be so stupid to deny that all men naturally were born free, beyond being the image and resemblance of God himself. Milton's, Adams, and Jefferson were all in for the separation of church and state. And one of the reasons for the later break with Cromwell was because the Lord Protector wanted too close a relation of the crown and the Geneva collar. Jefferson did not want the teaching of religion in schools or colleges, which often dominated the other American universities at that time. In place of the central chapel, he built a library, which was common. The central chapel was common to all other universities in America at that time. But he was religious. Like Milton, he was rooted in 2nd Isaiah and the Puritan understanding of the chosen nation that is to bring justice and freedom to the world as well as themselves. He was a providential deist and a self-proclaimed Unitarian who believed that God was behind the revolution. Like Milton, he despised the Presbyterians who wanted to reintroduce hierarchy, and he agreed with Milton, "New presbyter is but old priest writ large." Jefferson invited various denominations to place seminaries close to the main campus and open science courses to the seminarians. What he wasn't good at was human rights. Though he famously wrote, "All men are created equal," in the Declaration of Independence, he was unable to apply that to the slaves. He did hate slavery, and he, quote, "trembled," unquote, before God with its effects for the nation. But unlike Milton, he did not see human depravity deeply enough, which has always been a problem for an over-optimistic American dream. But nobody's perfect. What did Abigail want for education? Women should be equally educated as men are. "Remember the ladies," she said to John, "and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors have been. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could." If we apply the logic of that to all the United States, we should deal with other marginalized groups as well. We have a long way to go. But I think we can do a lot with these ideas from the past and use them now. The higher purpose of education is not only for individual fulfillment, but for national concerns, as I've said. We want republicanism with a small r. Even if students study business, engineering, medicine, or science, we want them to be aware of the perils and promises of democracy. University students need to grapple with the major problems of the day. That doesn't mean you need to switch to humanities. Applications are down 50% across the United States. Keep going with STEM, or make it STEAM and include the arts. These concerns can be handled in one course, but it must not be an elective. It should be required for everyone. What we need is a course or seminar for all students on the American problems and the world's great issues as described in the handout. I want to concentrate now on the rise of authoritarianism and use solutions from Milton, Adams, and Jefferson for now. Tyranny? It cannot happen here, people say. But look at Germany in the 30s, the most scientific, musical, knowledgeable, theological, and civilized nation in the world. And it was a democracy. Look what happened in a short time. It's almost conventional wisdom now to say that the GOP will, if it can, turn America into something like Viktor Orban's Hungary. After all, they featured him at one of their conventions, and they bowed and scraped and yelled and cheered when he came. He has a democracy on paper, but he's an ethno-nationalist, an authoritarian one-party state in practice. How did we come so close to losing our democracy? Well, many on the right are very angry, grieving in their left out and left behind status. People who are mad as hell crave strong men who will shake up the system. People who've been bullied all their lives will identify with super bullies. They have legitimate grievances. The American dream is no longer possible for millions of non-degree people. The adage of work hard, success will follow is a sham. We need sympathy for those who tried but cannot get on board. This is crucial for understanding what is happening to America and cannot be ignored. It's why Trump won against all the predictions. Add to this September 11th, the grinding war in Iraq, Hurricane Katrina, the housing meltdown and the 2008 financial crash, the pandemic, stagnant wages, vast income inequality. Anyone could look around and see that the country is in trouble. Robots and artificial intelligence will continue to automate a broad range of jobs, and their main impact will be to destroy good or medium quality jobs for the non-college workers, as well as increasingly perhaps for workers with college degrees but without postgraduate degrees. They will tend to increase inequality. NAFTA and the World Trade Organization have certainly made it worse, and the Democrats have neglected the rural areas big time. We can be sensitive to these concerns, but there are some things we cannot compromise. Biden had a meeting with some of America's finest historians who painted the current moment as among the most perilous in modern history for democratic governance. Comparisons were made to the years before the 1860 election, when Abraham Lincoln warned that a house divided against itself cannot stand, and the lead up to the 1940 election, when President Roosevelt battled rising domestic sympathy for European fascism and resistance to the United States joining World War II. It was strong. Rachel Kleinfeld said, "What worries me most right now is the polling that suggests that between 20 and 40% of Americans would like a macho strongman who doesn't have to follow democratic rules." Unquote. This is the most serious problem we as Americans face. Well, democracy may be gone, but hey, I got cheaper gas. The loss of democracy is evident with some elected officials saying they're going to pull the race for their candidate. This is not another conspiracy theory. America Firsters are very loud and clear about what they want. They want to rejig the election so no matter what the vote is, their candidate will win. They're attacking the electoral process by gerrymandering and by curtailing blacks, Latinos, poor women, disabled, by making it even harder, and in some places like Florida, dangerous to vote. And if you have one party that does not accept election results, you don't have a democracy anymore. Cultural fears among many white people include the belief that we're being transformed into a new country, more radical, diverse, and less religious, not anti-gay like it should be, but rapidly changing attitudes toward gender and family. They don't like it. They don't like immigrants. They don't like liberal teachers. They don't like Nancy Pelosi. The Proud Boys, no women there, say, if you want to be a Proud Boy, a leader of the Proud Boys, you have to either do an act of political violence or get arrested. Those on the right pushing this line are placing themselves above the truth and above democratic custom. And Jewish persecution is at an all-time high in 2021. 1 in 4 Jews in America say they've been a subject of anti-Semitism. People are zucked and musked by social media, and they don't do mainstream news anymore. They pick up on white grievance xenophobia, the Great Replacement Theory, and the Charlottesville right-wing demonstration chanted, "Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us." Former Republican leaders like Ike, Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Bob Dole, and both Presidents Bush, though they often courted white voters who were opposed to civil rights, they rarely tolerated in public the extremism and conspiracy theories that we see now. Trump is a junior varsity oligarch, an embodiment of a cartoonish masculinity railing against wimpy democracy. Given the right conditions, any society can turn against democracy, and sadly, many are doing so now. Thomas Friedman wrote yesterday in the Times, New York Times, "This past election, yes, we did better, but we did not get a clean bill of health. We got a diagnosis that our political white blood cells did okay in beating back the metastasizing infection that threatened to kill our whole electoral process, but the infection is still there." And just this afternoon from Phoenix, a state senator in Arizona who has promoted white nationalists as patriots and called for executing her political adversaries said Friday, today, that she will serve as chair of the Chamber's Elections Committee, a spot that would give her sway over voting-related legislation. That's bad news. A huge conflict is also over what kind of government and democracy that we actually want. White Christian male rule? Abigail Adams would be furious about if she were here today. Versus a multiracial and multicultural nation, which will intensify to reestablish the U.S. as a white Christian evangelical country, which is what so many are pushing for. A civil war today will not look like the 1860s, or Russia in the 1920s, or Spain in the 1930s. It will begin with sporadic acts of violence and terror, accelerated by the social media. The most dangerous time is now, when white guys feel they have lost control of the nations. In spite of all this, there are still some areas we can get together on, if you can believe it. One point would be renew education about the religion and politics of the founders and of Lincoln, which would help with the right wing. They believed in a providence that God is the big player behind the revolution. They wanted a religious but democratic glue to keep the society on track. And along with John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, who suggested that the Great Seal should be a picture of the Exodus, of Moses on the bank and the drowning of the bad armies of Pharaoh, led by the fire by night and the cloud by day. They wanted that as the Great Seal. Instead, we got a pyramid instead. Adams, Franklin, and Jefferson were the three great intellectuals of the Revolution, and Congress turned them down. They also believed in original sin, which means that in political terms, that we realize there will be constant self-serving. But we also need a center shift left with a new Bill of Rights to protect the liberties we have or recently had. The old fights for equality that are now threatened by a Supreme Court, religious and right-wing extremists. In the past few years, there have been plenty of points at which it feels that the future of the nation hangs in the balance. If we only teach our students how to be doctors, lawyers, merchants, and chiefs, or how to be stupidly happy without any recognition of the world and national issues, and not leave room for authentic self-examination that's not dependent on social media, authoritarianism could happen here all too soon. We have often succumbed to the cultural and family forces that only want education to be self-fulfilling and to prepare our children for the wealth of things rather than the wealth of ideas. In an article by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he said this: "We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that's the goal of true education. The complete education gives one not only power of concentration, but worthy objectives to concentrate upon. That's the point. If we are not careful, our colleges will produce a group of closed-minded, unscientific, illogical propagandists consumed with immoral acts. Be careful, brethren, be careful, teachers, Martin Luther King said. I end with comments from two American gurus. First, David Brooks, who's worried about the rise of tyranny along with Milton, Abigail, and Jefferson, but can use their ideas. Quote, "In fact, what haunts me most is the rejection of Western liberalism, individualism, pluralism, gender equality, and all the rest that is not only happening between nations, but also within nations. The status resentment against Western cultural, economic, and political elites that flows from the mouths of illiberal teachers like Putin and Modi sound a lot like the status resentment that flows from the mouth of the Trumpian right, from the French right, and from the Italian and Hungarian right," unquote. Nevertheless, Brooks has high hopes for the future because of people like Milton, Adams, and Jefferson. He said, "I have faith in the ideas and the moral systems that we have inherited. What we call the West is not an ethnic designation or an elitist country club. The heroes of the Ukraine are showing that at best it's a moral accomplishment. It aspires to extend dignity, human rights, and self-determination to all. That's worth reforming and working on and defending and sharing in the decades ahead." To add another touch of optimism, some words of the columnist Lee Drutman. "We are not sleepwalkers fated for disaster. The recent epidemic of political pessimism has done something important. It's awakened us to where we might be headed if we don't make a dramatic change. The good news is that we are now waking up. We know the status quo is unacceptable, and this is cause for optimism and for leadership and education to take us out of the ravine. Enough with the pessimism. We can all try to be more inclusive. Listen to each other. Let's turn this mess around. No more political dog poo." Thought you might like that. National and world reconciliation is what we're striving for. In the handout, I present education as a way through and two religious solutions. One is worship with the founders. They aren't saints, but they do show a way forward. And secondly, world religions are a key to world peace and justice. We learn from each other and act accordingly with the essences of the 8 major world religions, interacting instead of infighting. That's what we fought for. That's what November 11th is about. That's what Veterans Day is about. How's that for a tribute to the vets who gave their lives for democracy? Thank you.
Reverend Charles Brock, you took so many of the themes that we have heard about here at the summit so far, education, Madison and the Constitution, trade skills with Tom Bodett, and woven them all here together tonight for us to examine revolution or tyranny, the fate of democracy, the future of democracy. Folks, how about one more round of applause for JES's own Reverend Charles Brock. So I'll use this as an opportunity to remind you that, as is customary with all JES events, you, the audience, are an integral part of what we're doing here tonight, being in conversation with us. So if you have questions, we'll work to get the answers from Reverend Brock. So on their way through, you likely were handed an index card and a golf pencil and an opportunity to write your questions down. If you don't have that index card or that golf pencil, our team members will provide that for you. If you do already have them and you've jotted your question down, please give them to our team. And we'll work our best to get through as many as possible before we conclude tonight. Charles, if I can, I'd like to start right there with the end. I underlined it as you said it in your speech. One is worship with the founders, not worship of the founders. With is an important word there. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure. That's a really good point. And sometimes we do have founders chic, that we think anything the founders does is fine. It's not. They were slaveholders. They had all sorts of problems. Sometimes they weren't very democratic at all. But they said enough, they did enough, and they acted enough. And they confessed their sins. My God, imagine a president confessing the sins of a nation today. That just doesn't happen. They did then. Lincoln did it. And he realized the country was on the wrong track in slavery. And Washington and Jefferson, Adams, Madison, the rest, even Andrew Jackson realized that things were terribly wrong and they had to be put right. And they turned to God, as a matter of fact, all of them. They were very religious guys.
So let's start with Milton. Who, when, and where did you get turned on to Milton?
Milton is sort of the number one person to study in English at Oxford. And he's considered sort of the holy of holies of the English language. And when I found out that he also was a nonconformist, and also that he owned a pub in my village, that got me interested.
So let's either rewind or fast forward for you personally. I want to stick with you for a second. When you had this idea of integrated education, what was the aha moment for you in your life that you said, this is my life's work, my passion, to preach this message to us? When did this come to you? Perhaps not as a bad dream or a nightmare, but really a vision. When did this come to you?
When I came back to Erie, and the Jefferson Society really helped me work that through. And I was grateful to Garvey and to Ferky and you, Ben, and so many others here, Angela, helped me work through those issues. And I thought, something's wrong with our education. I'm teaching at Oxford, I'm teaching at Penn State, 55 years. It's not going well. And so Kathy Dahlkemper and I dreamt up a course in politics for Penn State. It was an inclusive course. It included all sorts of stuff, from the arts, from science, from literature, religion. And we really made out pretty well with the students as well. And that's where it all started.
And so seeing that start, seeing the impact, and I imagine one of the challenges, and I couldn't help but hear this in your speech tonight, Republicanism with a small r, Democrat with a small d, and we have to specify and talk about that. Can we unpack the definitions of how we use these words? Because I think nowadays sometimes they carry a bit of weight, maybe they're not intended to, or we have to explain them, when capital letters, when lowercase letters. Talk to us a bit more about the democracy you're working on. Define that for us.
Yeah, democracy is one person, one vote. And the United States is not very good at this because we have an electoral college that's unfair. We have gerrymandering. We have all sorts of ways to keeping certain people down. And that's mainly the poor, the blacks, the Spanish, the women. Keep them down. Let the white boys rule. Hey, that's what we want, the white boys. And we have to keep overcoming that, otherwise we'll end up with a tyrannous country.
So one of your slides showed, and you spoke about it, the challenges to the voting process and trying to suppress voter turnout and to keep people away from the polls. You left us on two notes, one of hope from two different scholars. How did you feel after Tuesday? We just went through the midterms.
Yeah, I felt relieved because I was fearing, and I had to change some things around in my talk. I was fearing the country was moving quickly toward tyranny, and we stopped that on Tuesday. And Joe Biden said when he was elected, and he went to Europe for the first time, that Trump pulled everything out of Europe. He disdained Britain, he disdained Germany, and he sucked up to Putin and Modi and Sisi in Egypt and so on. It was a horrible moment in American history. Joe got back and he said to the leaders of Europe, we're back. We're a democracy again. We're back. And somebody said, Joe, for how long?
So that's my follow-up question. For how long? Because I feel like maybe it's just me, maybe I'm alone, maybe some of you are with me, but I'm kind of getting exhausted of every 2 years, every 4 years, wondering about the fate of our democracy, the peril of our democracy, that we're hanging on by a thread, that we're barely making it. How long?
Well, I don't know, but I'm hopeful that this past election has said it quite a bit to the United States and to each other, that we don't want demagogues, we don't want liars, we don't want election deniers and so on. We want truth, we want honesty, we want them to live up to the ideals that the founders had. I think we're on our way.
So you spoke a bit about the impact of social media in so one, are you on Twitter? Can we follow you on Twitter?
You cannot.
Okay, so we'll follow you here at the JES. What have you been observing the impact with Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter? Do we see this as a good thing, a bad thing? Still too early. The jury's out.
Well, it's a really bad thing. Teddy Roosevelt called the rich the malefactors of great wealth. What he meant by that was Andrew Carnegie, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and so on, that had so much money that they had the United States under their control. They would put in the people that they wanted and so on. They put in Teddy Roosevelt, they paid for him, and then Mark Hanna said, "We put the bastard in, but he didn't follow the script."
Do we need another Teddy Roosevelt?
I think so.
Okay, so I first want to remind the audience, we're going to take your questions, so if you have them, we'll take those, we'll incorporate those into the conversation. But also, I want to ask the audience a question, if I can, Charles. I know tonight's about you, but let's ask them a question, because I'm going to ask you to react about that. How many here are fearful about the fate of democracy? Raise your hand.
That's a lot.
Okay, can I ask a follow-up question before I turn to you? How many here are hopeful about the fate of democracy?
That's good.
What do you make of that?
I like it.
Why?
Because people have started to see that we've been screwed in the last 4 years, badly. And we're starting to see that point. And apparently Senator Toomey came out today and said that really forcefully as well.
So Senator Toomey imposed term limits upon himself in left elected office. Some offices we have them, some we don't. Should this be a blanket policy? We only have politicians for a finite amount of time. Or do you think not having term limits is a good thing for American politics?
Well, I'm not sure, but I would tend to prefer term limits. I mean, I would be far too old to run this country.
So, Charles, as we heard from several people starting the program, you have done a lot, and you're continuing to do a lot. Why found and direct the Brock Institute for Mega Issues Education? Try to boil that down for us here tonight.
Yeah, well, it's more or less what I said in the talk, that education has to be not just to get a job. I think if we only consider our colleges for that purpose, we've lost the ball game really badly. But even if we do still think about getting jobs, and it's easier for me to say because I was born into a lot of money, so it's easier for me to say things like that. But in spite of that, okay, train to be an engineer, train to get a job, but you also have to take a course in American politics and history in order to be an educated person. If you don't do anything except engineering, you're not an educated person.
So I think that's a great message for current students. How do we do those that have already gone through the education system? How do we get them back in? How do we evolve their education that they've already received? Says the guy with an English degree.
The Jefferson Educational Society.
So here at the Jefferson Educational Society, why is it so important that Jefferson, perhaps not for the person, but his ideals about education, why does that of all the names that this could have been, why does that resonate with you?
Because he had, like Milton, the idea that you wanted to be a well-rounded and interesting person. You know, if you only study medicine all your life, you're a pretty boring person. You know, you got to know what's going on in the hearts, not just the bodies of people. And a good medical education, which is changing. LECOM is helping with this in a big way. You look at the whole person, not just the parts. You know, you don't examine just the wrist. You look at the whole person. You look in their eyes, and see what's going on. And that's what education should be. We should look in each other's eyes and see what's going on. Who are we? Why are we? What are we here for?
So we looked at three fascinating minds tonight. Do you think we'll see another Milton, Jefferson, Adams that we could then put in the same level as them, not including yourself, of course, some humility here.
Right.
But do we have those amongst us today?
Well, the interns of the Jefferson Society are starting to show a lot of good stuff, and I think if we educate people in that way, even at Penn State and Oxford, if we educate people with a broad education, not just specialist education, we will be seeing that emerge.
So you have a wonderful, wonderful handout here, and I hope folks got a copy on the way through. If you didn't, I think there are still some on the way out. And you pointed to that, and world religions being an important part of that. We've talked a lot about politics, but for somebody who's coming at this for the first time, hearing it here tonight and thinking where to start aside from the handout, what do you hope that they would hold on to tonight here of being open to exploring world religions?
Well, an inclusive view. We have in the West a very terrible thing that we've done in the last 1,000 years. We've said it's either our way or no way. If you don't accept Christianity in the way that I tell you to accept it, then it's no good. You'll go to hell, or whatever metaphor you might want to use. So we need to say, come on. Jefferson said it too. Why would God limit himself to the Jews? No, that's fine to have it. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Taoism, Confucianism, Native American religions, African religions. God expressed himself through all those. Why should we turn him off? Just to say, we got it right and you got it wrong.
So thinking about educational institutions, what do you make of the conversation around colleges deciding to cancel certain speakers, not have them when either the faculty or the student body rise up, or the creation of safe spaces on college institutions to have that? What do you make of that today? I'm
glad I was never college president. That would be a really tough thing to have, say, some white supremacists come in and say, we don't like blacks, we don't like Mexicans, we don't like anybody except white people. If the college had a speaker like that, that would be tough. We'd have to have somebody to counter that at the same time. Then that would make a real college, not just to push one particular point of view, like, say, some colleges do.
So one of the important things that I think you touched on, and I began by saying you were weaving a lot of themes that we have heard throughout the summit already together here, the restoring a dignity to the trades, lifting up trade skills, and giving that the same sort of attention that we give a college degree. At the same time, this person in the audience is saying, a college degree, for those that still might want it, might seem out of reach, that it's too expensive, that it's for the privileged, that it's only for the wealthy. How do we make college education more accessible at the same time we're lifting up the trades?
Yeah, I think we do have to do what we used to do. Penn State didn't charge any tuition. You had to pay for your room and board, but it was cheap. You get a job, and you could get your way through without college debt. Well, that's not possible anymore. We need to help. The government needs to help. They got plenty of money. They need to help an educated society. The Chinese are really good at this. They only accept people for leadership unless they've been through a really rigorous education. I wish we had the same view in our place.
So this other audience question, they must have been paying attention when we were talking about the definition of democracy and working through words, and they're asking you to unpack two words here: freedom and tyranny.
Well, one, of course, they are symbolic words to a large extent, and there are 1,000 definitions of freedom, let alone tyranny. But in general, one knows when one is free, and one knows when one is being kicked around and not being able to express yourself. It's not too hard to figure out in Nazi Germany that you are not free. It's not too hard to figure out in some parts of the United States, some rural communities. If you go out of line, they throw paint at your house. They slash your tires and so on. That's not free. And that's tyranny. And we have to fight against that all the time. Always will. It's never gonna be perfect. We have to keep fighting all the time.
So, Charles, this has been a wonderful night, and so much has been talked about, so much has gone on. Audience, I think you've soaked it all in are processing, and I know we're dealing with heavy issues, and we've got wonderful material, including that handout. And so, Charles, maybe a way to conclude our talk tonight would be to both think about what makes you the most hopeful for the fate of democracy, and then the last question I would want to ask. So 2 questions. 1, what makes you the most hopeful about democracy? And then 2, for those that heard all that you have to say and take the handout, they go home and they read it and they say, this makes sense, or I might disagree, but I'm doing so agreeably, but I want to help. I want to get involved. And I think, one, the answer is, attend more lectures here at the Jefferson Educational Society, if I do say so myself. Sure. But what would you recommend they do when they get in the cause? Before you answer those, the hopeful, what do people do? I do want to take a moment to thank you, the audience. As I think Ferky said in his opening remarks, thank you for attending week 17 of the Global Summit this year. There's been a lot going on, and we're so appreciative to you for your attention and your attendance. And of course, we invite you to tune in to the live stream programs that we're having from Redlands, California, the first ever time that the JES has expanded its Global Summit initiative. Now 2 cities, not just 2 days where it started, but now 2 cities this is happening in. So come here, check out those programs, or watch them from the comfort of your own couch, but stay involved. Then go enjoy Thanksgiving, and then we'll see you back here in December for 3 programs. Of course, I want to thank all of our sponsors that make all of this happen. I want to thank the JES team. Charles, that includes you. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you, and we want to thank you. And again, celebrate your award. Thank Tom Hagen for all he does for the community and for this award named after him. Thank Mayor Schember for being here tonight. Thank our chairwoman, Mayor Joyce Savacchio, our board of trustees. I saw plenty of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We're so grateful for all of you, because I think in this room are people who want a better Erie and are working for a better Erie and are working for and want a better country and are trying to make that happen. So Charles, what makes you most hopeful about democracy, and what can we do to help?
I read a lot of history, and that gives me a lot of hope. Also, I come here, that gives me a lot of hope. I watch Erie Insurance, what they do with Erie, and that gives me a lot of hope. Those 3 things are big time.
And so what can we do to help? Boil it down tomorrow. What should we do Saturday morning?
Buy an Erie Insurance policy and give me a bottle of champagne.
On behalf of the Jefferson Educational Society, the Brock Institute for Mega Issues Education, and Erie and beyond, Reverend Charles Brock, congratulations and thank you, thank you, thank you. Folks, join me in a round of applause for Reverend Charles Brock.